From ancient Roman emperors to the rulers of Europe's old monarchies, from 20th century dictators to 21st century supreme rulers, history has taught us that when one person has too much power, there is often an abuse of that power. In the 17th and 18th centuries, in a period known as the Age of Enlightenment, philosophers began to re-examine the idea of government. One of the foremost political philosophers of the Enlightenment was Charles-Louis de Secondat, Baron de la Brede et de Montesquieu. Montesquieu believed that understanding the various forms of government and finding ways to prevent corruption in government would help to improve human life and reduce society's problems. In his writings, Montesquieu identified three types of government: a monarchy ruled by a king or queen who is limited by laws, a republic ruled by an elected leader, and despotism ruled by a dictator with unlimited power. The governments are also based on how leaders derive their powers. Monarchies are based on honor, and people attain higher status and rank by impressing the leader. Republics are based on virtue and place the common good above individual interests. Despotism is based on fear, with little regard for the rights of the people. To prevent corruption in government, Montesquieu developed the theory known as the separation of powers. Separation of powers is a political doctrine where the responsibilities of the government are divided into individual branches. Each branch is limited from exercising the core functions of another branch. Montesquieu advocated that the power of the government be divided into three main branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. The intent of separation of powers is to prevent the concentration of power in the hands of one person or one group. Montesquieu wrote, "When legislative power is united with executive power, there is no liberty. Nor is there liberty when the power of judging is not separate from legislative power and from executive power." The separation of powers doctrine is spelled out in Montesquieu's book, The Spirit of the Laws, which is considered one of the greatest works of political theory and jurisprudence. Montesquieu and his writings inspired the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Constitution of the United States. America's founding fathers, especially James Madison, who is called the father of the Constitution, were heavily influenced by Montesquieu's theories. At the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Madison and the other delegates established three independent branches of the government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. To protect and maintain the separation of powers, James Madison played an integral role in establishing a system of checks and balances within the government. Checks and balances means that each branch of the government has some authority over the other branches. It limits the powers of each branch and assures that each one has to work with the other. That way, no one branch can become too powerful. For example, Congress passes the laws, but the president has the power to veto or reject the law. However, if 2/3 of the legislators still want the law, even after it's been vetoed, they can vote to override the president. And the Supreme Court can invalidate or cancel a law if it finds that the law contradicts or violates the principles of the Constitution. During the time period from 1750 through the early 1760s, before the American Revolution, and before the 13 colonies came together to form the United States, each colony's government was formed according to one of three different legal models: royal, charter, and proprietary colonies. By 1752, the colonies of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire were royal or crown colonies. In a royal colony, the ruling monarch of England appointed a royal governor and council. The governor and council administered the government of that particular colony. The king's government had direct control and authority over the royal colonies. Most of these colonies had a two-house legislature. The council formed the upper house and the lower house was elevated. The royal colony's representative assembly was elected by the people. 2 of the 13 colonies, Connecticut and Rhode Island, were charter colonies. The King of England granted the charter. It gave permission to settlers to establish a colonial government. The charter established the rules under which the colony was to be governed. King Charles II granted Connecticut a royal charter in 1662 and Rhode Island in 1663. The colonists in charter colonies had the right to elect their governors and both houses. Because charter colonies were governed by the citizens of the colony, they were less subject to British rule and enjoyed many more liberties than colonists in royal or proprietary colonies. Many royal colonies began as charter colonies, but had their charters taken over by the Crown. Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania were proprietary colonies. In a proprietary colony, the British Crown granted a province to proprietors. A proprietor could be an individual or a group authorized to settle the province at their own expense. The proprietors owned the land and were granted full rights of self-government. Proprietors appointed governors and had the authority to establish courts, develop towns, and collect land taxes to recoup their investment. By 1752, a representative form of government was established by all of the colonies. Each colony had its own history and developed in different ways. However, despite these differences, common features and patterns emerged in their governments. Colonial governments consisted of a governor, a council, and an assembly or House of Representatives. Local governments varied from colony to colony. However, throughout the colonies, there was widespread participation in local community governments. These town meetings were a direct form of democratic rule, where each citizen had a voice. With the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, America declared itself a free and independent country. At that time, the colonies were at war with Great Britain. In 1783, the Revolutionary War ended and the 13 American colonies were free of British rule. Because they were fighting to rid themselves of the strong, domineering British monarchy, the Americans wanted a government that gave most of the power to the states and very little power to the central government. Without British rule, there was no government in place, so the leaders of the Continental Congress had to create one. In March 1781, the new government, established under a constitution called the Articles of Confederation, went into effect. Almost from the outset, it was clear that there were serious problems with the Articles. There was no court system to resolve differences between the states. Congress had no authority to deal with national problems, and there was no central leader the people could point to. Because the federal government had no power to collect taxes, each state had to collect their own taxes. Many states, like Massachusetts, for example, had incurred huge debts in fighting the Revolution. To help pay off the debt, the governor of Massachusetts increased the taxes citizens had to pay, and he stipulated that the payments be in gold or silver, not paper money or goods. But many of the citizens were farmers who had debts of their own and couldn't pay their taxes. And because they had been off fighting the war and not tending their farms, they had little income. Many began to lose their property through foreclosure or were sent to debtor's prison. It was so bad that the courts, especially in the western part of the state, were overwhelmed with lawsuits for debt. Among those suffering severe financial hardship was Daniel Shays, a farmer and former captain in the militia. Shays met with others who were in his position. They wrote letters appealing to the state leaders in Boston for help, but they were ignored. So Shays and the others decided to take action. Shays began to muster and train an army. In August 1786, 1,500 farmers marched on a courthouse in Northampton to prevent foreclosure proceedings. As long as the courts couldn't open, people couldn't be imprisoned for their debts. Over the next several months, Shays and his followers, known as Shaysites, carried out attacks and shut down courthouses throughout the state. The uprisings attracted almost 9,000 rebels. The entire country was focused on the desperate situation in Massachusetts, but the federal government had no authority to deal with it. Things came to a head on January 25, 1787. Shays and about 1,100 rebels attempted to seize arms and ammunition stored at a federal arsenal in Springfield. They were met by General William Shepard of the Massachusetts militia and 1,200 militiamen. Expecting reinforcements that never came, Shays advanced. General Shepard opened fire with small arms and cannons. 4 people were killed and 20 wounded. Shays' rebellion exposed the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. When Massachusetts appealed for help, the Confederation Congress was unable to do anything. Many Americans realized that something dramatic needed to be done if the new nation were to survive. In February 1787, Congress invited the states to send delegates to Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation. The 2 most important topics to be considered were creating a strong central government and a standing federal military. On September 17th, after much debate and compromise, the new Constitution of the United States of America was signed.